We were looking at organizational life cycle yesterday. I just want to pick up a couple of things on that, and then we'll move ahead into other areas. We were talking about the age is not really what's important. It's what's happened during that age. And the possibilities of reviving it in organization is, that can go on and on and on. If the things are done right at the right time. And of course, the further you get on the other side, the harder it is to bring a little, to get a new vision going and pushing that thing back uphill so you can get it a little more effective. I want to look at, just review Jim Collins' book here, How the Mighty Fall. Have you read that book, anybody? Nobody's read that one? Interesting way of looking at it. And he takes an organization and he looks at them and he comes to various conclusions of why different organizations fail. But he walks it through a number of steps and it's in its life cycle as well. So I thought we'd just add that to it and then summarize with his conclusions of why various companies do fail. And then we can ask the question, are there correlations here between what he has found versus what we have found and where we're working in the various organizations that we are affiliated with. He puts it in the first stage then, calls it the hubris born of success. It kicks in when people become arrogant. Things get going, and things get going really good, and all of a sudden it's kind of like, wow, you can't not but succeed. There's almost an entitlement feeling that it'll just keep getting better and better and things will get approved, just continue to go. What tends to happen is they tend to forget then what got them there. And all the work and sweat and thinking and debating and arguing and compromising and all that stuff that goes with it. He goes on then, the best leaders never presume they reached ultimate understanding of all factors that brought success. And so they remain hungry learners. And we're back to the learning again. Hungry learners. We're so great we can do anything. That initial success has amazing ways of making you feel almost invincible, is what happens. Moves on to the second stage then, where he calls it undisciplined pursuit of more. More of whatever those in power deem success. So now it's, push the pedal to the floor here, and let's get out of it what we can get out of it. And here now it starts to move. You're straying now from the disciplined creativity that led to success. So, wow, you just kind of keep going and, wow, let's try this, let's try that. We were successful here, we should be successful there. Make undisciplined leaps into areas you can't succeed. My son-in-law became probably a multimillionaire when he was in his early 30s, had at least 8 businesses, all connected with the tile companies. And then what he did from the tile company, he went off into the granite for tops of sinks and that type of thing, and which is connected to the tile business, right? So that's a nice connection to expand your business, and you can tell people from this one we have that, and we on both sides of that, increases business, really where to go. Then he got into the undisciplined overreaching, I should say. Overreaching, he thought, wow, if we can be successful in this, in the tile business, why can't I do that in the movie business? And so, a lot of money went into there, and running a tile business and doing movies, doesn't equate to success. Just because you have success in one side doesn't mean it's going to happen over here. And he's finding that out, slowly but surely. And as the money, gets burned up and not used, it's not multiplying anyway. use the organization to increase personal success, and that was what was starting to happen. I mean, he was starting to feel pretty good about what was happening there. And I mean, when you looked at it, if you're the outsider looking on, you would say, wow, this guy can turn it, snowballs into gold up in Siberia, Then the denial of risk and peril. Leaders discount negative data, they amplify positive data, put positive spin on ambiguous data. So now they're starting to realize, wow, this isn't quite going the way we think it was going, and so you start doing a little spin here and there, make it not look quite as bad as it might be. And it's blame external setbacks rather than accept responsibility. Oh, if those guys would have done their job, this thing would have went off down there, and the movie would have worked and so forth, and they just didn't get their act together down there, and then thing fell apart. Fact-based dialogue disappears. So we don't want to talk too much about the facts here, okay? They're pretty hurtful at this point, not to mention harmful. So imperils the organization by taking oversized risk and acts in ways that denies consequences of those risks. So a little bit like that guy riding that car there. Kind of not too smart in the risks that are being taken, and then paying the price for making some bad moves. Then grasping for salvation. Okay, things are getting bad. See where we are on the cliff there. We're coming down. Cumulative risk have gone bad assert themselves now. Now it's that snowball effect. And one of the comments he made to me was that I never knew, it took so long to get it up to there, I never knew how fast all that could disappear. Just how fast that went away. Boom, I mean, there's just those dominoes, and once they started falling, things just collapsed all over the place. Sharp decline is visible to all, and now that's what was happening. Everybody was knowing in the companies, they were we're in trouble here. We're in trouble. We could lose our jobs here very fast. Critical question: how will leadership respond? Lurch for a quick fix. Oh man, tried everything in the books, everything you can think of. You try to, stick your finger in this hole in the dike and that hole in the dike, and will they go back to basics that got you the success? Maybe, maybe not. Didn't do it. Then the last part, we've tried everything. You can't blame us for not trying. So, things are falling apart. So what they're doing, they're looking for that silver bullet to make everything better. And it's not happening. Then we get into the capitulation to irrelevance. And the multiple false starts lead to loss of morale, of moral irrelevance, and eventually it leads to death. The Grim Reaper shows up, and that's what happened. My son-in-law lost all his businesses, lost all his homes, all his vehicles, everything. Lost it all. Lost it all. So Collins, let me go back to that. Multiple false starts lead to loss of moral irrelevance, and then eventually death. And we're back to, this is what we're talking about, where the leadership or the followership people, somebody should be looking ahead to see, okay, this is what's happening. What are we going to do to stop this before we get way up here where the snowball, to push that snowball back up the hill is really tough to do. Really, really tough to do. In fact, Collins will say, if you hit 5, forget it. Don't even try to push it back up the hill. It's too far gone. It's too far gone. I think of MAF, who was, are you familiar with that? Used to be Mission Aviation Fellowship. And they were involved with the use of aircraft on the foreign mission fields and flying missionaries all over the place. Well, as time went on, guess what? Roads got cut into these places. Missionaries started getting their own 4-wheel drives. And pretty soon, they were becoming irrelevant. So what did they do? They started figuring that out pretty early before they got down to 5. They started figuring out early, and that we've got to change here. If we're going to survive as an institution, then we've got to adapt, because airplanes are not going to be in the future role of carrying missionaries here and there, or the local people from the different places around to hospitals and so forth. It's not going to happen. So what did they do? They went into technology. So now they help mission agencies who they can, or in certain parts of the world where you don't want your emails read, you know, they set these things up and get secure technology for the mission world. So they've adapted to a new situation. They didn't die. They didn't end up, you know, realizing, just keep shooting bullets at keeping the airplanes in the air. They realized that's out. It's not going to, that's history. It's not going to happen again. I think of our own DMIS program here. Once we started the PhD programs, the PhD ICS, as soon as we started that one, man, I was doing really good. We had like 30 to 40 people. I direct that program. And we had like 30 to 40 people, and the next day or the next week or so, month or so, you know, we were down like to 15 to 20 people, because we had a bunch of them transfer into the PhD ICS. And then it just went down and down, and because our pricing here at Biola, of course, that you are very familiar with, is not necessarily cheap. And so for the mission community, you know, that makes it pretty tough. So you got a price problem, and the number of units were only like 6 or 8 units difference between doing the one degree versus the other degree. So anybody in their wise mind is going to go ICS, right? PhD ICS. Well, then what are we going to do? Okay. You can't keep going on with the existing program, or it'll die. It's just a matter of time. So we've revamped that whole thing, and now it's going through the approval process and so forth. But it'll be very different, and you will know the distinctions between the two. It will be cheaper than the other one as well. It'll be shorter than the other one as well, and the dissertation will be a project rather than a dissertation. So we've really cut it down to make it actually what it really should have been in the first place, is a real DMIS. And well, once again, you know, seeing where that thing is going, you've got to make the adaptations, or you will end up down here on 5 and the thing will die. So we'll see if it comes alive again. I think it will, but that will be in there. Well, he summarizes the key points as he sees why organizations eventually get into 5 and die. He says organizational decline largely is self-inflicted. There's where your leaders get kind of enamored with their success and push further than what they probably should push, and then get overextended, and then things start to happen. Recovery is largely discipline. Can you get back to the basics, what got you there in the first place, see? And that's why we have to be continually reminded, why did we set this thing up? What was the purpose of it? Back to your vision statement, see? Why are we in existence? And you can't let that go. You can adapt that, but you got to know what it is. If you don't reach stage 5, then you can rebuild. So, David, there is hope. We can rebuild this baby. But notice this one, the biggest impediment to growth is success. Success. Because you become very enamored with your abilities. And that's one thing that happened to my son-in-law. Actually became very arrogant. That, look what I've done. You know, he grew up with hippie parents on the beach. All right? And his father died, as an Native American, died of heroin overdose. That was his lifestyle. And look what he came and did, and ended up where he came. What happened to him? Yeah. And then all of a sudden it was the crash. Pew, you know. Arrogance. That's the success. There's something about success that can get you real fast. Can get you real fast and destroy you and destroy the company or the agency or the school or whatever it happens to be. And we were talking about this yesterday, then when does leadership interject change on that continuum yesterday that we were looking at, right? And we had the Colorado church over here, And then we have David's deal down lower. And here's the hint he gives. Equilibrium is a precursor to death. When things are going good, you know, starting to really feel balanced and nice and steady, you may be too far. That's when you've got to start looking at it to see where we are and what's going to go. What's going to happen there. Okay, and then two other things here, and then we'll jump out of here. Lifecycle strategy here. Living systems cannot be directed along a predetermined path, but like herding the proverbial butterfly, they can be ushered forth with reasonable expectation of progress. So what he's saying is what? It's just kind of not like a linear thing you can just follow and get it pushed back up there. You're going to have to be out of the box thinking, doing a lot of different things. Herding buffaloes, or butterflies, or try cats, herding cats. You know, that's what you're up against when you try to push it backwards. Tough job, but possible. And that's his conclusion on that. Last one here, I don't think you have this. I think I might have added this after you left. But leaders and followers always find themselves somewhere within an organization's life cycle. Whether you know where it's at or don't know where it's at, it's there. And it is having influence on you and on the organization. So that's one of the reasons we will look, when I give you the case study tonight, we'll have to look at their life cycle. Where are they in their life cycle? Because that has tremendous impact on models and strategies that will be applied there. All right, we want to look at frameworks for analyzing organizational culture. There, how do you like that picture? That was last Monday. Up there, up in the foothills.
Must be expensive to feed those.
No, they really don't eat that much. All right, quick review of the course, and then we're going to introduce the framework for analyzing organizational culture, and those who participated in it, both the leaders and follower side of it. So we've been looking at the leaders, we've been looking at the followers and the power that each incorporate, and this all being played out in the bigger cosmic drama of the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of Satan. So either it's servanthood or it's selfishness that will come out. We're going to add now, anybody, how many got into Bowman and Deal at all? Reframing? There we go, some of you, okay. We'll be introducing that. We'll get started in that tonight, and we'll look at the 4 organizational realities that are out there. What they will claim that these are 4 are in every organization. All 4 are there, and we'll get into some of the details of each one of those as we go through. We will also then, by next week, we'll get into Wildavsky's book and looking at his, what he calls regimes, from slavery to anarchy to equity to hierarchy. And he will trace Moses and the Israelites through those and show Moses' role as a political leader. It'd be a very different way you've ever looked at Exodus. Very, very different. So what we're going to do is kind of take those and other ones and put it together, and this is the model then that you will now start to use to analyze the case study that I will give to you a little bit later. What this gets in, remember we talked about knowing the historical background of any institution. So Biola, you got to know about the fundamentals of the faith to understand Biola. So what are the critical decisions that were made when this organization began? What are the founders' assumptions? What are the founders' guiding ideas? And what's his vision or her vision? What's the values that drive this particular organization? You can start reading back in the history of any organization, and you'll start to see those come through. Then we'll add Wildavsky's regimes, We'll look at the 4 regimes: slavery, anarchy, equity, and then hierarchy. And we'll look at that from an organizational perspective in the case study. Where do we find the different subcultures? Because there's organizations have what? Subcultures as well as a culture. They have subcultures. And we'll have to look at the subcultures in this organization, which will be at least 3. And where are they in the process of these regimes that are out there? From there, we'll, and actually we'll start here with this, with the frames of reference, look at structure, human resources, the political side of it, and then the symbolic side of it from Bowman and Deal. And then we want to look, what's the trust factor? The prior question of trust. There we go. And the other line that goes with that is?
What you say, do, or think, build or undermine trust.
What you say, do, or think. There you go. Does it build or does it undermine? Yeah, that's not quite, that was a translation of it. What's the trust in this organization? And what is the morale in this organization? That's pretty easy to pick up. You can pick that up really fast. And then, of course, what we have been talking about is that whole thing of the life cycle. Where is this organization in relation to the life cycle at the moment? And then, so we want you also to come up with 2 metaphors. One that describes what the organization was before, when it was birthed, and one that describes what the organization is right now. So 2 different metaphors to capture that. We'll keep going over this, so you don't, if you don't get it, that's fine. For each of those categories, then you can collect the data, and you can look at, you have a number of things on Blackboard that was put on there about Interact, that gives its history and all kinds of data that's provided for you there about that. So you can look through that material to look things up and find out who are the key people, who are the key players here, how are they selected, how do they use authority, is it legitimately used, and all that kind of stuff, and who are the alliances that are being formed that push agendas one way or the other. That'll come out pretty strong. And then implications, what are they then for the leadership, for the followership, how does servanthood play out or don't play out? And how is power used, or used in a good way or used in a bad way? There's a tool then that you can use there that will give you specific analysis on specific little case studies that provided there. Really don't care if you use that too much, but anyway, this is where we'll be headed. Oh, excuse me, right there. This will be the model, the overall model that you'll use to analyze that. So I'll actually will break you up into teams tonight, and I will then give you some time to get together and start to formulate how you're going to do that. And then what we'll do is we go through here, we'll go through a section or 2, then I'll give you time to reflect in as teams on how that section relates to the material from Interact. And then more material and more time to work together. So then you'll start working as teams now from now on out as we go through the various parts of it, from Wildavsky to the Bowman and Deal frames. Okay, any questions on that? Pretty simple, huh? Yeah. All right. All right. For those that are taking it by a field course, then you'll do this as an individual. Okay, let me give you the case study here. An agency in need of restoration, resuscitation, I should say. Restoration probably too, but resuscitation. It began back in 1951, so we're talking, that's been quite a while ago. Yeah, it was the new download. You probably didn't get it today. So if you have the new download, you'll have it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, the one that was the same time?
The same,
Okay.
same number, yeah. I stuck it in there. Usually I don't give that out, but I decided we'll just go ahead and do it at this point. So it began in Alaska, up in Alaska, in 1951, and what happened was there was a number of independent missionaries. Remember where we are here, Alaska, everybody's independent up there, right? Kind of do their own thing. There's a little bit of Alaska, you know, it has that independent feel about it. And so these missionaries would come out once a year and get together so they could have some fellowship. I think there was around 16 of them. And they went to this one guy's church, Gillespie's church. They'd meet there and kind of, you know, have a good time of reunion and just spiritual uplifting and just a break from the regular things that go on in the ministry up there in the various tribal settings that they were working in. And John Gillespie had worked a brief period of time with some of the tribal people there, and then he actually started a children's home in Valdez. Remember where one of those ships crashed or something? The oil spread all over in that area. And then he went to Anchorage, and there he became the pastor of the Church of the Open Door there. And he would be also the one that would start Victory Bible Camp, which is a beautiful, beautiful camp for kids. And hundreds and hundreds of kids would go through this camp every summer. And his son would eventually run that Victory Bible Camp. They decided then, you know what, we should really form an organization. And then they asked John Gillespie, why don't you be the head of this? And so he did. So he dropped out of the pastorate. He became then the head of Alaska Missions. And, you know, it's pretty small at this point, you know, like 8 couples or so. So it's pretty small. And John Gillespie was one of these types that were very much big picture person. Let's start a radio program, you know. Let's start a Youth for Christ. Let's, you know, that's the type of individual he was. And very big picture, very energetic, and very much on the go over the whole period of time there. So they wrote a purpose statement then in 51 that says this: the spreading, furtherance, and dissemination of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ through evangelical mission work and organizations in the territory of Alaska. So this is pre-state Alaska at this point. And you know, things were really rough back in that period of time, you can imagine. Fewer aircraft, and at that point you're not having a lot of those little snowmobiles, things that you can drive around and stuff. You're using the dogs and the sleds, and so that's how you would get around. And it was tough work for these people living in those type of environments up there. By 53, they'll make a change, and in their purpose statement there, and it says, make Christ known throughout the Arctic to evangelize the territory. Notice the last phrase, as the Lord directs. Okay, there's your independent flavor coming through here. We're talking Alaska. So what is the Lord telling you to do? You just go do it, okay? It's not like you work it through the whole system of bureaucracy. You don't do that. You just go out and you do it. Their target audience at this point were basically First Nations people, the Alaska, the Eskimo, and the Aleut. Those 3 were their basic target audiences at that point in time. By the time we get to 1956, and feel free to interject questions anywhere along the line here, because I'm just giving you a scant overview, but you will have data, as I said, that you can download from Blackboard. By the time we get to 56, they rename it now Arctic Missions. And Yeah, okay, we don't need to say much about that. And by the time you get to 87 now, so some significant time period has gone by, 3 decades basically. The purpose statement is now changed again. The purpose of Arctic missions is evangelism and the establishment of responsible groups of believers. So now you see a switch in purpose statements here, from one to the other, from evangelism now to evangelism plus. So something has happened here. And what that was is one of the fellows in leadership had got a hold of David Hesselgrave's book. Are you familiar with that one, Planning Church? This is actually the first really good church planning book that came out that was really geared towards church planning. Hesselgrave was a prophet Trinity. He had worked in Japan, and this was the first major contribution to church planning. And that book was used for decades, basically. Now it's a little dated. But in that book, he had what they called the Pauline cycle. And the guys saw it and they said, wow, look at that. You can just work your way around there and plant churches, you know. Just follow the Pauline cycle, and then we'll get what we need to get. We'll get churches. We'll go beyond evangelism till now we're going into church planning. Okay. So there we. So we add the Pauline cycle to the mix here. Okay, where are we working? In Alaska. What kind of missionaries do we have? Very independent missionaries, all right? Not everybody was going to buy into this, all right? This is different than what they came there to do. Just evangelize, work with the people there, the tribal groups, and so forth. So there was a lot of angst and just, okay, you fine, you go that way, we're not going this way, that kind of stuff was going on. There's just too much of a change for a lot of them to be able to do that. Too much of a change.
So you're saying that some of the missionaries objected to the establishment of churches among the evangelists?
As their mission statement, yeah.
Okay.
They didn't want to do that. Not that they were against somebody else doing it, just not them.
Okay.
Didn't want to take that role. Wanted to keep it back to just the evangelizing side of it. And we don't care if other agencies go and do that, that's fine. Just that we don't want to do that. Or at least some of us within this organization do not want to do that. Mm-hmm.
Meaning some of the people, just a follow-up question, meaning Dr. Stephan, some of the people saw a clear distinction between evangelism and churches.
Yeah, they would see that distinction and only felt they were gifted or wanted to move only in the evangelism side of it. They didn't want to push. They lose some discipleship, yeah, that's fine too, but not to the thing of forming new churches and going through that whole process. Yeah, didn't want to do it. So what happened then? Leadership looked out and started saying, okay, what within our organization is not really geared towards planting churches? All right. And they looked around and they saw anything that didn't look like it was helping to plant churches, it was cut. Victory Bible Camp would be one of the first things to go. And they also had personnel working in Victory Bible Camp because Victory Bible Camp became for them an automatic place to recruit for their agency. People would come out of there, they'd go short term, and then they'd go long term into the thing. And so it was a natural conduit to bring growth into the agency. They now cut that. Okay? When they did that, of course, there was some hard feelings. Not everybody liked that particular move. But the justification for the move was, this is our statement now, this does not help produce churches, therefore it needs to go. And so they cut it. Okay. Let's see if I forgot anything here. Good enough. They began then a Canadian branch in 1964. So I jumped ahead a little bit and came back. And the target audience here now, and especially when we got into the 80s, Beyond First Nations people, those were always the first targets. Then they get into the Métis and the Sikhs, and Calgary and Edmonton and so forth. There are a lot of different ethnicities that are there. And so they decided they want to start putting personnel into these groups to start working with them as well. So now they have expanded beyond tribal people, or Eskimos or Inuit or whoever you want to, and then into Canada. All the Canadians are Athabascans or of some kind, cleared up to the middle of Canada, from the west to the middle. So they were working with those various groups, but now they expand to go into some of the major religions of the world, for the Sikhs and so forth. So now their purpose statement will change again. And our purpose is to evangelize, and this is the Canadian side of the purpose statement. Our purpose is to evangelize Muslims living in Canada, to disciple those that believe, to integrate them into local churches, and to help mobilize and train the Canadian church to do the same. So you can see now they had bought into the church planning side of it, and actually take it a little step further there, that they're going to be involved in the training part of it too, so that they can get Canadian churches also involved in the mission work there as well. So that's an expansion. But that's the Canadian field. They can make their own things. They do their own things. They're separate. They're all still under Interact, but Alaska has its deal, and Canadians have their deal. And so definite change there in how far they will go and the people that they work with. So we've gone out of tribal animus now into the Sikhs and so forth. In 1988, they didn't like the name anymore, so they had a contest. And they had a contest as to who would win it. I mean, who would rename the organization. And the winner got to go somewhere. I don't know, they put him on a cruise line. I don't think the one that ended up in the in the Gulf down there lately, but that was going to be the prize, whoever won that. And this one fellow was walking down the street in Anchorage, and he was going to the bank, and he saw something on a post office box for mail, which said Interact. He liked that. He thought, that's a good name. So he submitted the name, and he won. He never went on the cruise. They just gave the money back to something. I don't know what it was. But the name changed then. And they wanted to do it to reflect, a broader geographic now area, and then also broader in its ministry. So that was a major, major change that came about then in 1988. By 1994, they're now up to 160 people. Okay, and if at that time they had the IFMA, which is the more conservative and the smaller groups of missions agencies, and they would rank number 18 in size in the IFMA at that point. So it's a pretty small organization. In 91, they open a third field then. They go to Siberia to see if they can take pictures of meteorites that come down on you. Did you see that on television? That was pretty interesting, huh? Yeah, they began in 1991. And these guys that went over there were younger, and most of them were very well trained missologically. And there were already some churches there, so it wasn't like they were going into pioneer settings like they were doing in Alaska or like doing in Canada. So they took more of a facilitator role, working with the existing churches that were there to help them then go out and plant churches. So very different from evangelism up in Alaska to everything down here in Canada to over here, all both in pioneer settings, over here in a facilitative setting where you already have existing churches but they don't know what they're doing, so you're working with them to help them plant churches. In 1995, they began following the Sikhs back. They began a work, I think it was northern India. So they're following the people line, the people flow back from Canada back into India. And so they put a couple over there. Yeah, it was North India, working in North India there. So they're just following basically the normal way that the people flow that was there, and just following that back and using that to their advantage in ministry. Then they moved the headquarters from Anchorage down to, why they keep this name I'll never know, but Boring, Oregon, okay? I think I would change my name if that was the town crier there or something. But anyway, there's lots of Christmas trees there.
A different way to pronounce that?
No, there is not. It's just boring. But there are lots of Christmas trees there, okay? Lots of Christmas trees you can get there. So that's where the headquarters is, still there today. Well, let's see, did they move it? They might have just moved it again. I'm not sure. So, looking at, over a period of time, you see that they've moved from just strictly rural settings into now urban and rural settings. They do both now. You see that they worked with First Nations people and the Eskimos and the Alouette and the Athabascans and so forth. And then they moved into the Islamic world, and they moved into Sikhs and Hinduism, and so you've got a lot of the major religions now that they're having to deal with. How big are they? 167. Then by this time they're maybe 180, somewhere in that vicinity. Let's see, did we get everything? So their vision now, of course, is quite broad compared to what it was when they started way back in '51. You'll have this in your data there, but it kind of gives you can watch the growth that takes place and the major players that come on the scene and what happens during that time period. So the one that, let's see, where is, I'm not seeing it come out here on this one. Anyway, we'll cover it later. Anyway, you'll have that chart. You can follow it through. Now you can start to look at the life cycle of the organization, where it's at, and how well it's doing. Let's get into the structure side of it a little bit. You had an American board and you had a Canadian board. Now you had to do that legally because the Canadians can't have an American board over them, so they have to have their own board, and the Americans have to have their own board for government purposes on each country. But what they did, they always meant, what we did every meeting, Americans would meet and do their thing, and the Canadians would meet and do their business to make their governments happy. Then we would come back as a joint group to do our business for the whole Interact Ministries. So they were basically, like most organizations, the board met twice a year, and one would be in Boring, Oregon, and the other during the winter. And during the summer, we'd go to Anchorage for the meeting up there. The style that was used by the board was governance. So they weren't really interested in running the operations day by day and knowing exactly what's going on. They were after the big questions. Are we doing what we're saying we're doing? And that's the questions they would be looking at and investigating at the board meetings. What's happening out there? Are we fulfilling our vision statement, or where are we going off on this? On the structural side of it, then, the organizational chart that they have, pretty direct, pretty similar you would find anywhere, where you had the general director and then the board above them and so forth, and then the various breakdowns of how things were. I won't go into that. You can look at that. That'll be on your material as well. Let me introduce you to...
How current was that organization chart?
What's that?
How current is this?
That will be the one you'll use. Yeah, that'll be up to date at that point, and it's when it was the case study was going down. And actually around 2000 is when it happened. Let me introduce you to the general directors, who they were, and their personalities, so you get a feel for them. And Gillespie, as we mentioned, was the big picture guy, the entrepreneurial type. We're going to start everything, you know. We'll reach Alaska, we'll reach the world. I mean, that's the type of person he was. Gail Van Diest then would come on the scene. He was a very detailed person, but he's a very people person as well. So he was really good to coming up alongside the various missionaries and say, how's things going? Very detailed to know how to help them. And he and his wife, they're the ones that were out there in the early 50s. They lost a child during one of the winters, died out there, couldn't get them in, you know, to the hospital and so forth. So they have a tremendous track record of also doing ministry and now overseeing people who are doing ministry. Very detailed, but very, very people-oriented. He actually is the one who, he read somehow he got a hold of Passing the Baton and invited me up to Canada, and I talked to the missionaries about exit strategy. Nobody was thinking about exit strategy, and from there I would go to Alaska and talk about exit strategy, and did that bomb. It did not go over very well. The next guy on the scene, and he was kind of handpicked by Gail Van Diest and mentored along the way, was Gary Brumbelow. And Gary Brumbelow was a great orator. I mean, he was a great speaker, pull you right in, and whether you're talking about teaching the Bible or, you know, catching the vision of the agency and so forth, and wanting to be part of that, he could do that. He was very, very good in that. He's also very, very task-oriented. Let's get it done. And here's how you can get it done. Boom, 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 go do it, get it done. So there was a little bit of that. We moved away from the people person to more of the task person. That was a major change that would be in the personalities of the people. And we won't go any further than that, but they do now have Dale Smith as the new general director, but we won't worry about that because we're only going to, our time frame in which we're going to go up is just to 2000. That's all the further you have to go. Okay. That's field directors. Okay.
Did Brumbelow speak at Biola or anywhere? 48. I mean, I'm sure I know the name.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he has ever came. They always sent somebody here. They were here during the missions conference. They had somebody recruiting. I'm not sure if he came down here.
What's he doing now?
I don't know where he went. He went to some other group, and I'm not sure where he went. I heard, but I forgot. When you look at the three fields, so here's some of your subcultures within the culture of Interact, you know. Alaska, they looked at themselves as the grandfather, you know, and they felt, you know, there was Alaskan spirit plus God leads. You know, that was very much their ethos up there. That's why they didn't like the exit strategy. We're not even thinking about that, okay? Goodbye. Thanks for coming. Go home. Then Canada, that was the second on the block. They were looked at as kind of like the big brother, the older brother. And then Siberia, those were the young bucks and the young does over there. Because those were strong in missiology, and they were just doing something very, very different than what was being done anywhere. Because they were, you know, with their training, they knew what to do when they got into situations like that. The board, watch this one here. Really, the members ran everything there. They had basic control. If 10% of the membership decided they wanted to have a board meeting, they could call a board meeting. That's the power that the membership had. And I mean, how many organizations you know who could do that? I mean, can you, Biola, let's get 10% of Biola faculty together and make them have a board meeting? You may be looking for a new job, you know. That's very rare. But that shows you how the independence that the missionaries have in their philosophy of how things should be run. Let's see here. I'll come back to that. Okay. The board then read Engel's book that came out earlier, but we read it, I think, in 98, I think, or 99. A Clouded Future. And the thesis of the book is that all these little mission agencies like Interact are going to have to fold, or they're going to have to join up with some other existing agencies and pull together. And so the cost factor was a major issue. Money, right? All these little groups have their own person who keeps the books, right? So they have to have a person who does that, and a person that does this, and a person that does that. No, why don't you put 2 or 3 of these small organizations together? You still got only one person rather than 3 people doing this job. And so for stewardship's sake, and because there was lack of finances and so forth, outside pressure was pushing smaller agencies to join other agencies to form together, to partner together. The question that came out of the book for the board was, is Interact then a small agency trying to act like a full-service agency, reaching all these different people groups, spread out from India to Canada, to up to Siberia, to over to Alaska? And then what is Interact's niche? What should they really be doing? So those were the questions. And as the board started looking and started investigating the organization again, one of the things that the book pointed out to the board was, this organization is the Titanic. And it's the Titanic kind of at the end of the movie. And that dude is pointed downward, and it's starting downward. And we may not be to 5 yet on Collins' chart, but we're pretty close. Pretty close. So as they started doing more investigation of what was going on, they started realizing the personnel that they had, for the most part, was aging. And they could lose 50% of their personnel in the next 5 years just because of age alone. Not because of any other kind of attrition, just age alone. These people are going to retire. Okay, that's half of the organization. That's significant, okay? And the people they were bringing in was insufficient to keep up with the numbers that were going out. So you got aging missionaries. So then they looked at the donor base. They found out, guess what? The donor base is the same as those 50% that's leaving. And once they go on retirement, what happens? Their funding is now minimized, and so the funding that's going to be coming in is going to be dropping significantly. So now you got your personnel is going to drop, and your funding is going to drop. You can see why the Titanic is now, it just tilted a little more. So looking at the life cycle, and we did look at the life cycle to see where we were, and we knew we were in trouble. So what they did was they established a task force called Task Force 2000. And they got some money together. I think it was around $10,000 or something like that. And they decided, we are going to meet twice a year. No, 6 times a year. In this next year, we're going to meet 6 times. And this task force is then to come up with ideas of how to salvage this organization. You got 1 year to do it. You'll meet 6 times to do it. They put people on the task force from the board, from the field. Did we have an outsider on there? Can't remember. Can't remember if we did or not. But it was pretty much spread around so that nobody could say this group kind of drove the thing, you know. So the task force was quite broad. So their job was not to do it, but to bring recommendations to the board for them to hack through and see what they want to do with this thing. It's interesting, as they were starting to look through and do some of the research in the bylaws, they found out that the agency was to last for 50 years and then close its doors. We'd already passed that. So no, you can tell nobody was reading the policy manuals, okay? That wasn't happening. All right, so now you are going to become the task force. We're going to have 2 task force. So if 2 task force can't solve this problem, we're in really big trouble. All right? So here's what you're going to do. We'll have 2 teams here. I'll divide you up after the break. What questions did the agency believe it was necessary to answer? Were they the right ones? What structural changes should be made? What human resource actions should take place? What political actions must be taken? What symbols, vision statements, stories, symbols, rituals, should be maintained, jettisoned, or changed so the agency can survive? How can symbols help members leave past pain and enter a hopeful future? Because guess what? It wasn't real hopeful at the moment. It wasn't real hopeful at all. If you'll notice that structure, human relations, political, and symbol, there's your frames from Bowman and Deal. Okay? What metaphors then describe the organization when it began, and what metaphors, if you can get this thing renewed, what will they look like? What will it look like? So you have a past metaphor and a future metaphor that hopefully provides hope for the organization. What changes have resulted in the life cycle implications? So where are we at in the life cycle, and what are the implications of that? In light of the above research, and we'd add to that, and I don't have that in here, but we'd add to that the Wildavsky's material. What regime are we in? Or what, we should put plural. What regimes are we in, and how do we move them, and which direction do we move them? And anarchy is not necessarily one we want to be in. So, and yet we probably will find certain people in anarchy, certain subcultures within anarchy. So how do we move them out of that as well? So from Bowman and Deal to the frames to Wildavsky to the regimes, bringing that all together. Let's see. All right. Now, you can't just say the organization can die, okay? You can't do that. You have to have a solution, all right? So you can't just go, when have your little breaks, you can't just go down and have coffee and have a great time. Got to think this through. And you cannot look this up on the internet, all right? Don't do it. There's a lot of history there, but don't go past 2000 when you're reading it. Just take it up to 2000. That's all the further you got to go. Provide the class members an executive summary of 1 to 2 pages. And then provide me an executive summary as well, and then detailed solutions. But just put it on PowerPoint. That's all I need. I don't need it written out. And then each team we'll set the time frame once we get going. Probably 20 minutes to a half hour to present it to the class. In the class, I'm going to be the board member, and the class is going to be the board members. So, we'll just change roles here. And so each team will get a chance to do it 20 to 30 minutes to present it to each other. So we don't need anything written out. What we'll look for in the judgment of who wins this thing, because there's only 2, so you got a 50% chance of winning this. the substance that you bring into your solutions, and then making sure you're using the course materials that are in there, bringing every one of those things to bear on this that you can, from Lifecycle to Wildavsky to Bowman and Deal and all that kind of stuff. Anything else we'll cover in there. And the metaphors and so forth, and then how good you do your presentation. So that's what it'll be based on. Be judged on those two things.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.